What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Magicka Sorcerer DPS. So this build is for endgame PvE content. There is a separate sort of beginner magsorc build that I also have out, which is more suited for people who are just starting to get into vet trials and vet content in general. So if you're more interested in just kind of a beginner build just to kind of get you started into vet content, I recommend checking out that sort build video instead. This one's going to be focused in more on endgame content. So magsorcs right now are actually are pretty decent when it comes to overall DPS potential. So in Dragonhold patch, a lot of the DPS gaps between classes has shrunk by a considerable margin. So a lot of classes are usually within 2-3k of each other. So magsorcs are definitely one of the easier classes to learn, mainly because we're going to be making use, as you can see here, of one of our pets. So that basically takes up 2 of our slots, and so your rotation is actually going to be fairly simple. It's still going to be dynamic, but you don't have to maintain quite as many dots as some other classes like a Necromancer, for example. So just like the rest of our build videos, we will not be going over any gear. So if you want to know what gear we will be using, I would recommend checking out the Magicka DPS gear video up in the upper right hand corner. It should be popping up right around now. So if you want to know what gear you should be using as a Magicka Sorcerer, feel free to pause this video, go click on that video, and then come back here when you're ready to go over skills and rotation. So that's what this video is going to be about. We're going to be exploring mainly the skills we'll be using, explaining the rotation, and then doing a 21 million dummy parse so you guys can get an idea of where magsorcs stand in relation to the other classes, Magicka classes specifically. So let's go ahead and get started here with our skills. So there are quite a few sort of substitutions you could make here, so I will be going over each of those in turn. But starting off first with our front bar. We have Crystal Frags, Elemental Weapon. So in order to use Elemental Weapon, you do need to have access to the Citric Order line, which you can get by having access to Somerset. So if you don't have access to Elemental Weapon, then the best spammable for you to use would actually end up being Force Pulse under the Destruction Staff line. So again, if you can't use Elemental Weapon, then just use Force Pulse instead. Then we have Haunting Curse. Even though we are running a pet build, they did nerf the amount of bonus damage that Daedric Prey provides for only additional 20% damage. So that actually brought down the overall damage potential of Daedric Prey. So Haunting Curse is actually going to end up being a little bit stronger than Daedric Prey. The DPS difference is small enough to be pretty much within margin of error, but your DPS ceiling is going to be a little bit higher. My highest parses were with Haunting Curse and not Daedric Prey, even though I was using a pet. Speaking of pets, we will be using the Twilight Tormentor for this particular build in order to maximize our DPS. You can instead run Twilight Matriarch if you want the heal. Twilight Tormentor is definitely going to give you the better DPS. You can just see straight from the tooltip that it deals more damage, and it has a sort of a quasi-execute ability, a reverse execute ability if you activate it while you're hitting something that's over 50% health. But the Twilight Matriarch has a heal instead. So that might be more beneficial for you. So kind of pick whichever morph you want. So if you want a self-heal, then you can go with a Twilight Matriarch. If you want just straight up raw damage, then stick with Twilight Tormentor instead. Then we have Bound Aegis here. You can run Inner Light instead. So the difference between Bound Aegis and Inner Light is with Bound Aegis, you get 8% max magicka and 2% additional spell damage from your sorcerer passive. Inner Light, you'll get 7% max magicka and 2% additional magicka regen. Now with this build, we will be using spell Symmetry in order to sustain our magicka, so we don't really need the additional magicka regen, so I prefer to go with Bound Aegis instead. Another advantage of running Bound Aegis is you have a little bit more survivability because you will have that minor resolve while you're on this bar. And for ultimate, we're running Shooting Star. This will give us the extra magicka and extra magicka regen from the Magicka Controller passive under the Mages Guild line. We can replace this with Greater Storm Atronach if you want, or if you want an AoE ultimate, you can also run Suppression Field instead, which actually is pretty decent, especially in trash fights. For our back bar, we are running Mystic Orb, Spell Symmetry, this is for some extra sustain, Unstable Wall of Fire, Barbed Trap, so you do need to be within melee range in order to make use of Barbed Trap, so if you're not able to be within melee range, you have 2 options. First option is to use the other morph of Barbed Trap, which is Lightweight Beast Trap. This will allow you to throw your trap, you still get the minor force, lasts for a shorter period of time, only 10 seconds, but it does allow you to play at range with the Magicka Sorcerer. Alternatively, if you have access to the Strategic Order line, you can run Challenge Acceleration instead, which gives you 36 seconds of minor force, has a 1.3 second cast time, but it is very, very helpful to have. Just run it for 36 seconds and you'll be good to go here. So a couple of options there if you can't be within melee range to use Barbed Trap. And then you do have to double bar your pet, so we have Twilight Tormentor double barred here. Then our ultimate is going to be Greater Storm Atronach. So in terms of other abilities, you might want to consider running here. So you could run Dark Conversion rather than Spell Symmetry if you'd like. Spell Symmetry requires you to use health in order to get Magicka back, and it also reduces the cost of your next Magicka ability by 33%. So you're basically giving up health for Magicka this way, versus Dark Conversion, which you're giving up stamina to restore health as well as Magicka. So you get 3600 Magicka instantly, and you get an additional 2400 over 20 seconds. So in terms of just raw amount of Magicka return, Dark Conversion is going to be stronger. There is a cast time associated with Dark Conversion though. It does take 1 second in order to fully cast the ability, so just keep that in mind if you do decide to go with Dark Conversion. The other downside of Dark Conversion is that it does use stamina, so if you want to bash weave at all to help bump up your DPS a little bit, it's going to be a little bit harder to do that with Dark Conversion. So it's kind of up to you which one you want to go for, Spell Sim or Dark Conversion. We already talked about potentially using Suppression Field as an AoE ultimate if you do need the AoE ultimate. It's really, really great. It's fantastic in trash pulls because it also stuns certain enemies as well. Under the District Summoning line, you could, if you would like, if you need a shield, you can run either Empowered Ward or Hardened Ward. Empowered Ward will give you Minor Intellect, which helps out Magicka regen, so if you have a lot of Magicka DPS, I personally would recommend running Empowered Ward over Hardened Ward, which just gives you a larger damage shield. So Empowered Ward is my personal recommendation in most scenarios. You could also run the Volatile Familiar as another pet, so you can have 2 pets out at a time. It's not going to be as strong as the Twilight Tormentor, and you do need to give up another 2 bar slots in order to use it. So that's kind of why we're not using it here. It's just more beneficial to run other abilities rather than Volatile Familiar here. So you can run it, you can have 2 pets, but it is going to be a slight DPS loss in order to do that. Under the Storm Calling line, you have Boundless Storm if you're within melee range. It gives you your Mage Resolve, so you get your physical and spell resistance bonus. And it also deals a pretty decent amount of damage. It's just very small ticks, but it lasts for a long period of time, so you're actually not giving up too many global cooldowns by using this ability. But it's mainly here for the additional survivability you would get from the Mage Resolve. And then if you need to provide a synergy, let's say you're the only Magicka Sorc in group, you will want to run either Liquid Lightning or Lightning Flood to get that Conduit synergy. It is a unique synergy to Sorc, so if you don't have a Sorc healer or you're running Liquid Lightning or Lightning Flood, then you will have to run it as a Magicka Sorc. So if you are running this, then usually you will be using this in place of something like Mystic Orb instead. It's not as strong as Mystic Orb. If you just take a look at the tooltip here, Lightning Flood is 1516 every second for 10 seconds versus Mystic Orb, which is 1194 every half second. So a lot stronger with Mystic Orb, so you will be losing some DPS by running Lightning Flood versus Mystic Orb. Moving on from there, under the Detro Staff, I talked about using Force Pulse instead of Elemental Weapon. If you don't have access to Elemental Weapon, you might also want to consider running Crushing Shock rather than Force Pulse. It's not going to be as much damage as running just straight up Force Pulse, because Force Pulse also has a little bit of cleave damage associated with it, but Crushing Shock has a interrupt kind of component behind it. So if you need a ranged interrupt, Crushing Shock is a great ability to have on hand. If you are running the Black Rose Prison Destruction Staff for trash fights, then obviously you will need to run Elemental Ring, so just keep that in mind if you are able to run the Black Rose Prison Staff that way. If you want to double shield, you can always run Harness Magic or Dampen Magic, but your Empowered Ward is going to be more useful. Minor Intellect is just a more useful buff than Harness Magic or Dampen Magic. And that's pretty much every... Oh, nope, Soul Trap. I do want to mention Soul Trap here. So you can run Soul Splitting Trap for some more AoE damage. You don't have much AoE damage right now. Your only real AoE is going to be coming from Blockade and Mystic Orb or Lightning Flood if you're using that ability. So it might be beneficial to use Soul Splitting Trap on trash fights, replacing, let's say, Bound Aegis, or perhaps Spell Sim on trash fights, so that way you get some additional cleave damage. So definitely an ability that I would recommend keeping an eye on in case you need additional cleave. And then from here, not much else here to really talk about in terms of other abilities. Yeah, that's pretty much it for skills on your magsorc. So just to kind of give a summary, most of the abilities on your front bar are going to be staples. You don't want to change out any of these 4 abilities here. Bound Aegis can be replaced with Inner Light if you prefer, or you can put on like a shield or something. This is just really here just for the additional max Magicka, the additional passive bonuses that we get. On our back bar, you do want to keep up Spell Sim. Magsorc still have one of the worst sustain in the game, so you're going to want to run either Spell Sim or Dark Conversion. Then Blockade, Barbed Trap, you want to double bar your Sorc pet, obviously, so these 4 I'd say are definitely staples. Mystic Orb is a good bit of a flex spot here, so you can replace it with a shield, you can use Lightning Flood, whatever ability you might want, you can replace Mystic Orb with that ability. So that pretty much covers all the skills. Now let's go ahead and talk about our rotation. So I already mentioned that this is going to be a fairly simple rotation, at least more simple than some other class rotations. But it is still going to be a dynamic rotation, and the reason for that is we have varying lengths of our dots. So Unstable Wall is 10 seconds, Barbed Trap is 18, Mystic Orb is 10 seconds, then you have Haunting Curse, which you can treat as a dot, which lasts for 12 seconds. So a little bit of a dynamic rotation here, but overall it's going to be very simple because you only really have 3 dots to maintain, and then obviously you would want to use the Twilight Tormentor ability if the boss or whatever it is you're hitting is above 50% health. So this lasts for 15 seconds. So you can see that there is quite a bit of variation here with our timings. So it is going to be a dynamic rotation, but we only really have to maintain 3 dots. Arguably, you can treat, if you treat Haunting Curse as a dot, 4 dots, and just spam elemental weapons. So a lot of your time is going to be spent using elemental weapon or crystal frags if you happen to get the effect to proc. So your rotation is going to be, again, really straightforward, just dynamic rotations. You just want to maintain all your dots as they start to run out. So I'll always start off with the Arming Trap. And once you get a crystal frag proc, you're going to want to use it right away. Be sure you use it right away. Try to use your pet on your front bar, just because you might get an extra proc of crystal frags that way. So the crystal frags, you have to activate a Magicka ability, so if you can, try to get your Twilight Tormentor to activate the ability while on your front bar. That's just to give you the chance to get that crystal frag proc going. But you can see, basically, it's a pretty dynamic rotation in terms of what abilities you want to prioritize. So let's say you have multiple dots that are running out. You want to start off with Unstable Wall and Barbed Trap. These are the 2 most important dots to maintain. The other dots can be secondary to this. So Mystic Orb, Haunting Curse, you can let those run out for a little bit here and just make sure to maintain Unstable Wall and Barbed Trap. Once you hit below 50%, you don't want to use the Twilight Tormentor anymore because the ability doesn't do anything else. And then in Execute, since we are running Mage's Wrath as our Execute, you can just keep on using your spamble. So Elemental Weapon, Crystal Frags, don't bother dropping anything at all, and just keep on going with the Execute. So you can actually, if you want to, run Mage's Wrath here under the Storm Calling line or Endless Fury. Kind of up to you if you want to do that. I personally found that it's a DPS loss, actually, to run Mage's Fury. But there might be some situations where it might be useful. Trash fights, for example, it just gives you some additional sustain by getting you some additional Magicka back. So might be some niche uses for it, but again, I found it to be a DPS loss overall by running this ability. Alright, so we're going to reset the dummy here so we can get out of combat. We're going to go ahead and do our 21 million dummy parse. So this will give you an idea of where Magicka Sorcs stand in relation to other Magicka DPS builds that I've released on my channel. So again, I'm not the best DPS in the game. that crown goes to some other players instead. So don't necessarily take my parse and compare it to like Lico parse or anything like that. We're not at the same caliber of DPS, but you can use this as a point of comparison to the other Magicka DPS specs that I have released on this channel. So let's go ahead and get started. I will try to narrate throughout the parse if I see anything that requires sort of explanation. So you can use Spell Sim whenever you feel like you need it. You don't necessarily need to run it all the time. Like, for example, right here, I'll use it just because I feel like I should use it. Don't be afraid to use it. Yes, you are going to take that health hit, but in a trial, you will have your healers watching over you, so the health you should get healed right back up after using Spell Sim, unless your healers are slacking somehow, somewhere. In which case, blame your healers. Gonna get our Atro ultimate off. But as you can see here, we're not getting a lot of frag procs here, so there's a little bit of RNG with the frag proc. Sometimes you get a lot in a row, other times you don't. I will use Spell Sim here to get some more Magicka back. Potion should be coming up, so I did not use Spell Sim. We'll use Spell Sim here again, though. You can see here, for example, we got a lot of procs all in a row, but that's not always going to be the case. You're going to have some dry streaks, like right now, actually. Spell Sim here. This is going to be the last time we use our Tormentor ability, because now we are probably going to go under 50%. Spell Sim again over here. You can see here, got a lot of nice frag procs there. Again, all RNG. So sometimes you'll have really great parses, sometimes you won't, and that's just because of the RNG of your frag procs. The Spell Sim just because I feel like I should use it here. I'm not gonna get a potion or a shard anytime soon. And some dry spell there with our frag proc. Prioritize blockade before parse. We're entering execute phase here, which is 25% or lower. Also here. Use it again. Give myself a little bit of padding here. Keep in mind, every time you use Spell Sim, you're giving up one global cooldown. So try to using it as sparingly as you can. I use my ultimate here. Ooh, we got some nice frag RNG. We got some pretty good frag RNG there. Alright, so there we go. That is the magsorc bear. So out of all the classes, I'd say magsorc is probably going to have the most variability overall in your parses, just because of the crit RNG with Crystal Frag. So just to give you an idea, oops, it would help if I actually have Comet Metrics bound. Correct. Must have missed it. But it would help if I put Comet Metrics on the correct areas. Key binding there. So for example, here we got 43 Crystal Frag procs, but in an earlier parse, probably a good parse here. Got 46, so we got a little bit more here. So that could contribute to our overall better parse here. So 82.8 was my personal did today. Also crit RNG as well, it plays a little bit of a factor here when it comes to Crystal Fragments. But generally speaking, yeah, that's pretty much how it all boils down. So again, you will see more variability with your parses just because Frags is an RNG proc. But generally speaking, magsorc's in a pretty decent spot right now. They're kind of middle of the pack when it comes to overall DPS. And as you guys saw, it's a fairly straightforward rotation. Still a little bit dynamic just because various timers on our dots. But overall, fairly good, fairly brain-dead rotation overall, at the very least when you compare it to some other classes like Wardens or Necromancers, where you have to do a couple of kind of mind games in order to keep up with Shulks as well as Blastbones. Well, that's it for this video. Hope you guys found this informative. If you guys have any questions at all, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.